I'm doing a session. It's called Composing and Remixing Filecoin Onchain Cloud Services. Now, I'm going to spend a bit of time in this session talking about how things work currently so that we can have a productive discussion on potential next steps. And I see a lot of people in the room here who already know, but I know there's a lot of people that have no idea how any of this stuff works. So this is going to be a lot about the current architecture of the warm storage service, and then talking about what one of the visions we have for the next version of this. I will say up front that it really started as a prototype, and it's still got some prototype style edges to it. So it's not our ideal service. It's not awesome. But it works, and it does the basics of what we want, and it's pretty solid. But it definitely has some issues with extensibility, with things that don't fit, and stuff that we want to fix. So this is a rough sketch of what our smart contract layer looks like for FOC currently. So this is like the entirety of FOC, and right now FOC is primarily the warm storage service. So warm storage service is a contract. We call it FWSS sometimes, so that's where you'll see that name. Now, it's a contract that sits on top of Filecoin Pay. The way we want to conceptualize FOC is that Filecoin Pay is the fundamental component of this. And so any service can sit on top of Filecoin Pay, and it's part of the FOC stack. And so you can write your own FOC service there. So you could have, I thought I had 2 of them there. Yeah. Okay, I did originally have 2 of those, but somehow I deleted it. So you could have any hypothetical service, like FOC service X, that may or may not use PDP. You can have another one that doesn't have anything to do with PDP. And they just sit on top of Filecoin Pay, using the Filecoin Pay architecture to interact with clients. And then the idea there is that clients have this one place to manage their payments. The rails are these lightweight payment mechanisms that the client can use to pay for whatever service is offered on top of the FOC stack. But currently, warm storage service is the primary one. Warm storage service is a bridge between PDP, which is implemented in a contract called PDP Verifier, and Filecoin Pay. Now, PDP Verifier is a very focused contract that all it really cares about is verifying storage. So the SP software, primarily Curio, interacts with that contract only, and the software registers data sets, which are essentially like PoRep sectors, but they are expandable. And within the data sets are pieces. So they're arbitrarily sized chunks of data that fit within a data set. So a whole data set becomes this addressable array of bytes, and that's what PDP Verifier proves. It asks for random challenges on that data set, and it verifies that the SP has access to that data in order to be able to prove it. It doesn't prove a replica, it proves that the possession or access of that data. So that's all it does. It doesn't concern itself with payments. It doesn't really even concern itself with clients. It's just an SP has said, I have a data set, I put pieces in data sets, and then it does proofs on those data sets with a particular frequency. Did you have a question, Vuk? I'm happy to take questions during any of this. Okay, Filecoin Pay is another contract, and it manages payment rails. Payment rails are just our lightweight form of passing tokens from clients to service providers, and it manages ERC20 tokens. Yes. Escrow, so yeah, and the payment rails are either for one-time payments or they are per epoch flow of funds, and Filecoin Pay delegates the proving of what's the word of it? Is it validation? It delegates to a service contract, in this case Filecoin Storage Service, at sorry, let me step back. Okay, Filecoin Pay. You set up a payment rail between a client and a service provider. So a service contract will do that. In this case, Filecoin Web Service storage service will do that. It will set up a rail for the provision of storage service for a data set in PDP. And it will say this SP gets paid at this rate for the provision of proven storage. And as the data set grows, because the client adds more pieces to it, the rate increases. And that's a per epoch rate. Now, at any time during the relationship, either party can settle that rail. So mostly that's on the SP to settle, but the client could potentially settle as well. But the SP shows up and says, I would like some money for the provision of my service during this period. So maybe it's the last few days. I'd like my money for the last few days because I've been proving the storage. Now, the SP will ask Filecoin Pay, can you settle my rail for that storage? Filecoin Pay then delegates to the service contract, in this case, Warm Storage Service, and says, this SP wants to settle the rail for these 3 days. Can I give that SP the full amount that should be paid for those days? And then the service contract can either say, yes, good to go, or no, there was some reason why we can't give the full amount. And in this case, it might be because the SP failed to prove a certain number of challenges. So maybe they failed to prove 2 of those days, and they showed up and proved the 3rd day. But 2 of those days were missing proofs, in which case they would not be paid for the whole period. They would be paid for a subset of it. Yeah. Do we have a microphone over here? Do you have a spare microphone? Be good to capture these questions. This is good because what we're trying to do here is sort of socialize how this stuff works so that you guys can both build on it, but also have opinions about how we go forward.
Yeah, I think it would be useful for everyone to just understand what PDP first is, like on the file system level, like what are like some of the assumptions that we're making, and then like everything else will make much more sense.
Yep.
So for example, if I want to do PDP, like what's the assumption? What am I gonna do to transform a blob into like a PDP blob?
Okay, so PDP is it's not PoRep, so it's our second proving system on Filecoin, and it's proof of data possession, not proof of replica. So we can't prove with PDP that you have a unique sequence of bytes on a disk somewhere that represent that data. All we can prove is that you as an SP can get those bytes if you're asked for them. So ideally you would have them on a disk somewhere, but it's not the kind of proof where there's a sealing process and it's all locked up to be a unique replica. So it's essentially a Merkle challenge where at a certain proving window, proving period, which we have set to 24 hours on mainnet, an SP will be challenged for a random sequence of bytes to provide a Merkle proof that they can access to that, and then the contract can verify that Merkle proof is within that data set.
So it's bytes, so I can keep it in the clear. And
it's in the clear. There's only one copy. This is the nice thing about it. There's only one copy. There's not an unsealed and a sealed copy. You give the bytes to the SP. The SP puts them on disk. That's all they need. And when they're challenged, they just go and read the
Yeah. So if I have a car file of 32 gigs. Just random bytes, it doesn't talk.
It doesn't care about any. Yep. It's the challenges, and currently it's configured to 5 challenges, I think, per proof. So you'll have to prove 5 random parts of it per day, and the math works out such that that scales to arbitrarily large sizes of data sets. So that gives us the assurance that enough probabilistic assurance that they have access to that data.
Sure. Next question. So now, let's assume I have now like 100 terabytes of like blobs, and whatever chunked in 32 gigabyte sizes, just by chance, and I want to add that, publish somehow that to whatever like FOC. How do I do that?
So we package them into data sets, and PDP works on pieces within data sets. Now it can either be a one-to-one relationship. You could put one piece per data set, or you could fill up one data set with as many pieces as you like. And it's just, as far as PDP is concerned, it's just a expanding sequence of bytes and just gets as big as the number of pieces you add. So if you have 100 gigabytes, you could put them all in one data set. And then as far as PDP is concerned, that's one proving unit.
Yeah.
You create the sector with the first piece, 1 megabyte, 1 gigabyte, 1 terabyte, whatever, and then you keep adding.
Yeah, and that's because there is no incentive model, so like it's flexible to do whatever you want. Like it's ultimately, you are publishing something on chain that makes sense for you as an abstraction.
Yeah, yes. We on chain, we put within a data set, which is just an ID, global ID number, we put the PCID, so that we use the same PCID algorithm as PoRep, not because we need to, but because it's useful to have it the same as PoRep. We put that on chain, and we use that to help us build the Merkle root as well.
But that implies that I do car.
No, it doesn't. No, you can do a PCID of any bytes. So with this model, we've tried to tackle a couple of friction points that we feel like trying to build on Filecoin for the past 5 years, where it's kind of hard. And one of them is this problem of telling people it has to be a car, it has to be chunked data, and we're kind of saying, well, maybe not. Like if you just want to show it with bytes, we'll take that. So our base level assumption is, and the SDK we built, Synapse SDK, it knows nothing about cars, it knows nothing about IPFS chunking, it's just bytes. You want to put bytes in, you just give it bytes. We add that on as an optional layer with Filecoin PIN. That's where we do the car and IPFS bytes and stuff. That's optional. So as far as this system is concerned, there is no car, there's no IPFS CID, there's no payload CID, there's just the root CID of a Merkle root of bytes. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah, it essentially is. It's just your object is your piece, and you just throw your piece at it, and that is what we content address. Yeah. Is that good? Any more?
They'll come.
Okay, good. Okay. Okay, but the point here is that PDP verifier is isolated to this issue of addressing and proving these bytes. It doesn't care about payments. It doesn't even care about clients. It just cares about SPs and what SPs say they want to prove. We add the client layer in with warm storage, and we add the payment layer in there as well. So that's where that gets added into this. Now, where was I going to go with this? Right, so in Filecoin Warm Storage Service, for each data set that we add, so actually maybe I'll talk about the client interaction here. So the client interacts, to onboard data, the client interacts with the SP, not the smart contract layer directly. What they do is they sign an authorization to give to the SP along with their data that says, I want you to onboard this data to the warm storage stack. And that signed verification goes into PDP verifier, and then PDP verifier knows to go from the authorization setup. It knows to offload that to the warm storage service for additional verification and setup. And so this signed little object goes into there, and that is then used to authorize payment setup. And we can reject this setup here. So what that means is that the SP software doesn't have to know about this stack, but it can trust that as long as the relationship is established with the warm storage service, it knows that it's going to get paid. So it knows that if the payment setup thing doesn't work for some reason because the client doesn't have funds or is not set up to do this, the onboarding won't proceed. So it's not a sort of just fire and forget and cross your fingers. There are assurances built in that the SP can get paid, even though the SP doesn't have to know about most of this system. So we do all that in the warm storage service where we get this signed authorization. It comes in. That authorization also has metadata, so the client can put their own metadata with their pieces and with their data sets. And we use that to do things like we can put IPFS CIDs in there as well, and that's the client saying, I did a car here, and the root CID that I care about is here, but that's just metadata. We're not treating that as, this is not old. It's a little bit like payload CID, but it's not payload CID. It's just the client putting something in that is of meaning to them. And there's a whole lot of other metadata they can put in there as well. Now, Warm Storage Service does this, sets up a payment rail for the data set, and it will grow that and decrease that, because you can remove pieces in this system as well, not like in PoRep. So a data set can grow and shrink, and it will manage that payment rail and the per epoch rate for that client, and it will mediate the settlement process when the SP shows up and says, I'd like to get paid for this. And it'll be able to look through what PDP verifier said for its proofs and say, you either proved for that whole period or you didn't, and we give you funds. Now, in this current system, one of the things we did in developing this service is we worked with Space Meridian, who have built PhilBeam, a product that they are selling, and that is built within the Warm Storage Service too. It is an awkward fit. They are a separate company, and they are providing a service that clients can opt into. That opt-in mechanism is within this system. If the client opts in to the PhilBeam service within their authorization setup, that's something that they do. They sign it. They say, I'm opting in to the PhilBeam setup. They will get 2 additional payment rails set up for a data set. So they'll end up with 3 in total. And these are lightweight enough that it's not a big deal, but they each have to be settled separately. So the 2 additional rails they get are, one rail goes to PhilBeam, who will charge them for egress costs of serving that data through their distribution network. And then the other rail will go between the client and the SP. And what that rail will pay for is when PhilBeam will attest on chain that the SP was used for cache miss fetching, and the client will pay according to the rate that PhilBeam says that the client was bothered to serve that traffic. So in this model, when the client opts in, they're paying both the SP for egress and PhilBeam for their egress. So if it's hot content, they'll mostly be paying PhilBeam, and if it's not, then they'll possibly be paying almost as much for both. Although, are the rates different for those 2? Are they same rate for egress? Same rate, okay, yeah. So that's how the PhilBeam model works if you opt into it. And that model is an attestation model where you, as a client, you're trusting this entity to tell you how much service you used of theirs, just like you do when you sign up to Cloudflare. It's the same kind of model. It's not a model, we're not doing any retrieval proofs here. It's purely a business relationship where they will show up at some point and say, this is how much service you used, this is how much you owe, and the rails will be settled accordingly. So that's in there, an awkward fit, but that helps us think about how we want to evolve this so that we don't have awkward fits, but we can serve a much more complex suite of services that clients want that revolve around storage. Are there any questions on that current architecture before I move on? Is that clear enough? Any fuzziness? No?
Maybe later on the implementation, because right now, sure, this makes sense on a theoretical level, sure. But practically today, I understand that there are some tools that we need to use, and
yeah.
How would I use this without also having to use tools?
Okay.
For you.
We'll just send you code, and you can look at it. I will talk about an awkward part of this that really does need to be covered here before we move on is Filecoin Pay. Now, Filecoin Pay is it's designed for lightweight payment transactions between parties and arbitrary ERC20 tokens too. Filecoin Pay doesn't care. You can either pay in Phil or any ERC20 on Filecoin, and it just doesn't care. this is where we collect some value accrual for Filecoin. So at settlement time, there is a small fee, a settlement fee, and that gets burnt. So that's where Filecoin and we as stakeholders in the Filecoin network get some benefit. So that's the bit we care about in terms of the value of this back to the network. But there's a bunch of security mechanisms built into Filecoin Pay to make this work. One of them is a lockup mechanism that I probably won't talk about here because it's not relevant, but there is this lockup so that the settlement doesn't have to be every epoch to get paid. I don't want to have to settle every epoch, that's just impractical. But I want to have the assurance that if I do it every 10 days, that I'm not going to only get paid for 1 day because the client walked away and didn't have money. So there's a model built in for there. The other security model that's built into Filecoin Pay is that the client has to authorize a service contract to manage Rails on its behalf. So the client, in this case with warm storage, the client has to do a setup with Filecoin Pay and say, I authorize warm storage service to manage payment rails, and in that process they can set, I authorize them to manage payment rails up to this rate, maximum rate. So it's sort of a safety hatch for users. They can say, look, I want to try this thing out, but I don't want to pay more than $1 a month. So don't let that contract do anything more than $1 a month, or else it'll just reject. So that is built into this system, but it does mean that every one of these services that sits on FOC has to have a client authorization. So if you want to interact with any service, then Filecoin Pay has to be told by each client, I authorize that service to manage payment rails on my behalf. So that's, yeah. Sorry? Yep, any ERC20. Yeah, and there's a cool little auction mechanism in there as well that figures out how much, how to get that back into fill, and so we can burn some of the fee. Okay, so given all that, this is a really rough sketch of a proposed architecture for a next version of this that solves some of the pain points. One of the pain points, remember, is the fill beam thing. It doesn't really fit within there. The base service here is SPs want to get paid for the provision of storage. And like the most basic version of this is there's no car files, there's no IPNI. It's just, I have bytes, you store my bytes for me. If you prove it, I pay you. That's the most basic version of this. That's the sort of the baseline we want to work here. And then you should be able to layer on services on top of that. So in this model, everything is still based around PDP. PDP is the lowest common denominator of this storage service. But we could also add in PoRep into here if we want to. That's a possibility in this model. But what we have here is this orchestrator model that's colloquially being called PDP boss. And it's just a really simple orchestrator that just manages the knowledge of sub-services that are bundled together for the provision of storage service for a data set. So when a SP software shows up with it and says, I've got a data set to be proven, and this is the bundle of services that go with that data set. The PDP orchestrator then manages that bundle and then defers to other services for whatever they need to do. So the most basic version of this in the open model that we've developed is the warm storage service on the left there, which is just the same thing that we're doing now, where PDP verifier the SP says, I'm doing PDP verifier with a data set that is managed by a warm storage service, and that will set up one payment rail for the provision of storage, and that's it. But let's say you want to opt into FillBeam, then you would get this package that comes down that PDP verifier tells orchestrator that we're doing warm storage plus FillBeam, and then we get to have two separate contracts there. FillBeam gets their own contract, separate entity entirely here. It's not permissioned by any of this system. As long as the client and the SP agree on this, then FillBeam can be part of the picture here, and that contract will get involved. That contract will set up its own 2 rails with Filecoin Pay for the client, and then you would end up with 3 rails, but they're managed by entirely different services that don't have to have any relationship directly. It's just, I know how to interact with this API, this interface, and that's it. Yes, so I'll get there. It's on the right-hand side here because it's, you can imagine this thing being entirely open and a bit messy and the kind of thing where the SP software could get itself in trouble by involving some nefarious contract or poorly written contract that just wastes all the gas or sets up bad payment rails, all that sort of stuff. And the SP has opinions about the kind of service that they're willing to offer here. And they should be able to express those opinions. And likewise, the client has opinions about the service they want to buy. So in this model, you might swap out warm storage service with a Storacha or a Kave service. And so the warm storage service that we've authored doesn't get involved at all here. And the package is just PDP verify tells orchestrator, this is a Storacha deal. That's all it is. Then the Storacha deal sets up its payment rails with its rates, and it does its own validation for that data set. None of the rest of it's involved. Or it might be some other combination of these things. And you can see I've put some other things in there. There's maybe an alt content distribution, maybe a competitor fill beam shows up, maybe there's one with retrieval proofs. We could have a service that involves IP&I, so we dribble a small amount of funds to IP&I for the provision of IP&I services, because you've opted in to IP&I and somebody should get paid maybe for that work. Possibly PoRep in there, a bit more complicated. Sorry, Irene? Yep. Do you have a mic? Oh.
Just to understand better, like basically now in this new model, the client is talking with the PDP orchestrator.
No.
Or no? Okay,
No.
I got it.
Okay, I'll explain that. This is on the right-hand side here. So this is where the server gets to be opinionated about the service that it provides. So a server would say something like, I serve warm storage deals because I like the payment rate for that. I also do IP&I. I will read your car and send it to IP&I and serve retrievals on the IPLD block level. And also I'll do Filecoin Beam if you want to. So the storage provider will have that list of what it wants to, the kind of service it wants to offer. Now maybe that storage provider also wants to be a Storacha one. It's like an Uber driver that also does Lyft. You know, I'll do either of them. You come up with, you want to do Lyft? I'll do Lyft with you. That kind of thing. So this storage provider can, they can either accept or block requests from clients for a particular package that they support or don't support. So the service, the SP gets to say, I do it this way, and maybe it's everything. I'll do anything you show up with, or maybe it's not. But then you get to do interesting things, like the SP might say, look, I don't serve content to random people on the internet. I will only serve retrievals via Filecoin Beam because A, I know I'm going to get paid, and B, I know I'm not going to get hammered for hot content. So they could say that if your package has to include Filecoin Beam, Fill Beam. Is it Fill Beam or Filecoin Beam? Fill Beam. It has to include that, otherwise I'm not taking the deal. So they get to express that as part of their package. And likewise, the client will have opinions as well about, obviously the client is the most opinionated party here about what they want to get. And all of this is, all of the server stuff here is all expressed within the service provider registry. So the client is easily able to do this. SDK would do this mapping of figuring out who amongst all the storage providers can provide this particular service configuration that I want. And then you go and talk to those SPs. So that's not actually one of the hardest bits, figuring out who, but yeah. Sorry, Kuba? For who? For the client?
For new services, right? Let's say, like, if I start offering, hey, I'm gonna validate that your SP says where that it is where it is, right?
Yeah.
The SP says it's in EU, and I'm gonna find ways to tell you whether that's true or not, right? And I want the client to pay me for that. Like I shouldn't require approval from each SP to opt into that service. It's up to the client to choose that service, right?
Yeah, there might be some class of services where the SP doesn't have to care because
Like that's exactly my point. But because like you showed just the two classes where, yeah.
Yeah. So, and an example of that might be maybe there's a. Okay, here's one. Maybe there's a charity service in here that where for each epoch I give a micro USDFC to some charity. SP doesn't care about that. It's just part of the package. Yeah.
Like to go back to the last session a little bit, it can be I am a SP. I only want to do PoRep because like I have all the hardware or whatever I want to do. And the new SPs that we're working with, they only want to do a couple of them only want to do PDP because they don't have all the GPU or whatever. But the idea is like, okay, then maybe the PDP SP and the PoRep SP, yes, they get to define what service they want to provide, but they can come together, getting managed by the MSP as a package service that like gives like the user or the market like the service they want. So yeah, SPs definitely don't have to do everything is the key point here.
How do you protect against SPs being part of multiple networks, like storage and this?
I don't think we want to protect against that.
If you want to attach it incentive, you probably do, right?
The incentives would be built in, I think, to so we've talked about the need to have some incentives built into PDP slashing, collateral. That's the kind of thing you would do at the contract level. So if you opted into warm storage, then there would be like requirements set up through that system. But
I don't have a right way to answer your question. I think it relies on the so-called L2s today. Do they see themselves as a part of Filecoin or a separate network? If they do think they are a product offered with their own toolkit and different offering, right? Like as a service, as a market in Filecoin, yeah, it's all Filecoin SPs. There's no Storcha SPs or Filecoin SPs. There's only Filecoin SPs that Storcha decided to work with because it's rely on their services, right? So I think it's a different question we're answering here, which is about L1, L2 incentive alignment. Less about what does the SP choose. SP just cares about, I have the resources, I want to provide services. Whoever is getting me the demand and paying me, I want to do that.
work. Does that answer the question? Vic, did you have more nuance to that? Is this getting too controversial? The idea here is like storage providers. It's like Lyft drivers and Uber drivers. Like they provide a service. They want to get paid for service. Like if they can opt into different ways of getting paid for service, great. Ideally, we as a network would like our L2s, our on-ramps, to participate with the rest of us and both provide value back to the network, but also take advantage of all of the work that the rest of us are doing, like building SDKs and dashboards and all the rest of it that work for all of this. If they can just plug into it, they don't have to fork contracts, they don't have to write their own, they don't have to do dashboards. There's a whole lot of stuff they don't have to do. They can take advantage of an SDK that we're putting effort into marketing and getting out into developers, and they just put a flag in there. It's like they tell their users, when you're using the SDK, just do it this way, and you will get my service, and you'll be able to opt into my encryption thing, or whatever it is. That's the idea here. Like we want to open it up so that these parties can participate in the same thing.
Yeah. So on that perspective, so if I'm a user today and there is a bunch of PDP content somewhere, let's say like multiple L1s, L2s, whatever, since there is no conception of car, like how do we make sure that all these networks are talking the same language? Because ultimately, if it's based on like random bytes, like it could also be that like there are like different different hashing strategies that people use. So generally that's the question. Like how do we make sure that if I'm a user, I want a particular CID, that I'm actually gonna find that CID on PDP, even though like PDP is not opinionated on that.
Is that a question of IPFS CID? This is a
content addressing question. Like
so PDP verifier deals in pieces. That's your base unit of content addressing here. That's going to be there regardless of any of this. So those pieces, PDP verifier, we're encouraging. PDP verifier is a global, basically permissionless system. Storace can use it, Akave can use it, and it's just a global thing, a global namespace of dataset IDs that are managed by currently warm storage service, but also potentially any other service contract. So that can happen, and it manages datasets and the pieces within those datasets all within the single contract. That's our ideal model, is that everybody uses that same contract. We want to have it so that it only has to deal with one of these service contracts, but there is a world, and this is the world we're currently in, because like Storace wants to take advantage of PDP at the moment. They don't have to, warm storage doesn't fit their needs now, but they can deploy their own version of warm storage as Storace with different payment rates and with functionality removed, and the same PDP verifier can be told to talk to their service contract. And it's the same namespace, same storage thing of PCIDs in the PDP verifier. Am I getting to?
Yeah, but that's assuming that you're, so like, sure, on a theoretical level, I completely agree. But when we start talking about CIDs, then you start talking about carrying in general, and there is a bunch of tooling around that, and I don't think we have consistency in the tooling. And if you go around and you look at the different implementations, you use different tools, you get different cards, unfortunately, and different CIDs. And in that context, this would not work. So as a user today, if I wanna store a particular file and expect to get that file back, by passing the CID, first, what should I use today? And did we actually check all the tools that people are using to actually do the card generation? And do we know which ones are fine in order for this to actually be compatible? And I'm saying this from the perspective of where Filecoin for years was not compatible with IPFS. So this is definitely a problem that could exist and likely is the case now. And I'm trying to possibly avoid this problem before we get into it, because this is all on chain.
Yeah, I think we're not trying to solve that problem here, and we're treating that as a
edge case.
No, it's not an edge case. It's orthogonal. It's still a thing, but it's not a thing for that we're that could be a thing we do of trying to solve this on chain, but it's just not a thing we're looking at the moment. We're just to the point of saying the user wants to store bytes, we will store the bytes and give them back to them. There is a special version of that where those bytes include a car file with all this, the Unix FS and all this sort of stuff. There's a special version of that, but that's like sugar on top. That is not an essential part of this system. So all those IPFS CIDs and how they're formatted in a car, that's a completely orthogonal concern to this system. And so all that stuff where IP&I gets involved and all that sort of stuff, it's nice, and we can make it work, we can use it, and we're doing it in various ways already, and it's working with Filecoin PIN, but that's a layer on top of this that's separate, and we're trying. I think one of the issues we've had with Filecoin is we've tried really hard to squash those things together, and we haven't found a way for it to work. And I think we could keep bashing our head against that problem, or we could just say, let's not deal with that as a problem, let's put that aside. And that's kind of what we're doing here. Jenny.
And I actually disagree with 40% of that, not all of it, because I feel because putting things on chain, I think one thing that we do lack of, and I think Magic is doing a session tomorrow, is we can propose FRCs that talking about standard, right? There can be FRCs where people, for example, we literally moved Filecoin as a community, we kind of moved from comp PCID V1 to V2 as we are doing PDP stuff. We didn't do that based on it's not protocol level things. We cannot force it. It's not consensus level. We did it by standard. I think there's a FRC that talks PCID, and that's the format that community wants to use. And then the tools started to support V2 PCID, right? In the SP software, in the client software, in the SDK, and so on and so forth. And the contract is also now talking in comp V2 PCID v2, we're calling it
PCID v2.
PCID v2 like language. So I think there's actually the on-chain aspect we can leverage it, which is like kind of like a metadata, right? Like you have like metadata talks about this is the version, or like this is how I prep the data, and all those can be FRCs. It's like my data is prepped by according to this FRC or whatever, and then it's the builders, the ecosystem around it that will be building the tools for the format of the data they want to interpret, they want to support, and then be able to understand it. And then storage providers doesn't care. They just want to like store fucking data, bytes, blobs,
but to be clear, these are things we're not solving with the chain.
It's not solving the chain. However, the information can be exposed on chain in some aspect using metadata.
So let's let Reba talk, because I think he's probably got some good.
Yeah, just to point out a thing, Wook, you said the moment you talk about CIDs, you talk about IPFS. This is actually not correct. But that's what you said, right? So I want to call it out. So when we're talking about CIDs here, those are the CIDs of the Filecoin proofs. So COM-D CIDs, COM-P CIDs, COM-Rs are CIDs as well, but they're not used here. But the point is that the CIDs that Rod is talking about on this slide are not the CIDs that you expect on IPFS.io, for example. So that's an important distinction.
I'll be honest, it took me a little while to come to this position, because I was on the IPLD team, okay? And I wanted that dream of IPLD integrated everywhere and those things to be joined. And we have this thing in PoRep, the payload CID we call it, and we shove it into this little bytes field in the F05 a deal proposal, and we say this is the payload CID within my thing, and it should map to the root CID of the car that's in there. But there's no enforcement of that, and there's no proof of that. That is just this sort of it's just an information that could mean or not mean something. And so we're just being honest about that, and we're not calling it a payload CID so as not to conflate it with all of the stuff that went into those discussions. What we're saying here is that the user can attest to something about their data, and so they sign metadata that can be stored on-chain that says something about their data. And in this case, we let them, and it's not even a mandatory field, it's not even a field, it's just a key and value that some software will do by convention. We'll do an FRC for this. The client gets to say, I've put IPFS data in here, and it happens to have this root CID, and it can go in the metadata. So that client could look that up in the future. Other people could look it up too, but it really shouldn't be used for things like doing retrieval testing, because it's just the client saying something, and that's all it is. And the client could say lots of things about it. So right now, that relationship between the IPFS data and how that car is laid out and the thing that's proven, the CID that's proven, is not clear. But on the other front of doing FRC, I think we should do FRCs for standards. There is an effort to do what's called CID profiles. That's really quite mature at the moment, and hopefully ready to land as an IP in the IPFS ecosystem, and that will define a standard way of generating CIDs with IPFS data. So that does all the things like it should be CID v1, it should use this hash function, and how you do the UnixFS packing, so the hamped width, all that sort of stuff. And so we can say, in Filecoin PIN, we can say things like, we use this CID profile, and we pack the car in this way, and we can even say that in the metadata. But again, there's no proof there. But you could prove it by redoing the process and getting the same outcome. So there is an effort to align on the tooling and all these variations of producing these bytes. Jenny's making a face. What's the face for?
Just like users here, I mean builders, right? Like people who help the end user putting data to the service provider. Those people should care about their data can be interpreted, can be fetched and understand to get back to the raw state of the data. They need to care about that. That's why they need to make sure that the information about how I can interpret the data that I'm retrieving, they need to care about how to make that information visible. Like I think that's the philosophy that we need to agree to design a system to expose those information.
Yep, and we're getting IP and I involved for that same purpose there, but we have to be clear about what is both provable and what belongs on chain as authoritative information. Reba?
Yeah, just want to basically double down on everything you said in the past like 2 minutes. The PDP verifier is this is out of scope for the PDP verifier. That's an important thing for a builder to know. More like the PDP verifier, at least today, the way it is shipped today, this can change down the road. Today, the PDP verifier understands only one multi-hash, effectively. Yes.
Ian got a question.
So I have kind of a different, relatively orthogonal question, which is, let's say, I work with a lot of social impact institutions. We've got Harvard and we've got the Internet Archive collaborating on preserving a single data set together. And they're both contributing storage resources in kind to this collaboration. How could they use PDP to prove that they were storing data without paying, can I put 0 in the Filecoin Pay contract, or would I have to interact directly with the PDP verifier or PDP orchestrator service in some way?
This actually came up when we were talking about this, and I forgot to include it. There is a thing about payment rates. Right now, FWSS in this incarnation, we've got a fixed payment rate. But at the same time, in the service provider registry, we are already allowing SPs to express their minimum and maximum rate that they're willing to take for things. We just have no way of consuming that. So there's a version of this, maybe in FWSS, where there's a market for choosing a particular rate of payment. But for that case, there's also a version of this where there's an entirely different service contract where you bypass warm storage entirely, and maybe it's a DAO, or maybe it's a public goods one, and it's completely free. And as long as the SP opts into that, maybe the SP says, I'm willing to do a certain amount of public good storage for free, and maybe it's permissioned. Maybe there's a list of CIDs that contract's willing to take. I don't know what it is, but you would the package then would include enough information to include some other component here that bypasses these other things. So the payment rails in this version are all set up in that level there. The orchestrator doesn't care about payments. So whatever package of combination of these things that's put together will get you payments or no payments. So some service in there that's involved in the package, maybe there's only one additional service and you've only got a package of one service, it might be free, no payment rails, as long as that's agreed to by client and server. And this contract permissions it in some way. So I don't know what that permissioning system is. Maybe there's a DAO that has an authorization list of some, I don't know what it is.
Is there a way, where would that sort of permissions list go? So let's say they were willing to accept, the Internet Archive is willing to take paid deals from not the Internet Archive, or they're willing to take unpaid deals from Harvard and the Internet Archive only.
Right. So maybe that storage contract would have a list of clients or wallets that if the deal is from that client, it's free. And so that would be the business of. And the point there is that's a great bit of functionality, but we can't smash it into this thing here right now. This thing's already too big. Literally, we're at contract size limit, and we keep on having to do funky stuff to get under the limit. It just doesn't belong in there, just like Phil Beam doesn't belong in there. But it should have space here where it can fit in, and where you could develop that as a separate thing with other people, not dealing with Philos at all, because all you need is an interface here, and you've just got to have SPs that are willing to go along with this party.
I had a kind of different question, but PDP orchestrator seems pretty core to the flow of things, and I also like this design because it's not all packaged into a single contract and rely on it. But who's going to own the PDP orchestrator? Is it going to be like an FRC for people to develop, or is Philos going to own it?
I think we would do ownership in the same way that we do PDP verifier. They don't have to be tied together again. It's not like PDP verifier has to talk to this. That will depend on the SP setup. But I think it's simple enough that it could be developed by Philos, but maybe deployed unupgradable. It's just a read-only contract. Yeah, it really is, all it is a mapping. It maintains a mapping of these packages so that when events happen on PDP verifier, it knows who to call out to deal with those events. That's basically all it is. It's very minimal state. It doesn't deal with payments. Yeah. So ideally there's one of them, just in the same way ideally there's one of PDP verifier. And hopefully there's no reason to have more than one.
Sounds like dual client. Yeah, sounds like the dual client that we had before, and yeah, Zen was helping to maintain it. Makes sense.
Yeah.
I think like, that one doesn't.
Is there a switch on that one that's not on or something?
I think like at the core, it's like what we are saying is like we want to simplify the base layer. The base layer right now is like FWSS is too heavy to consider as a slim like base layer. We want it back to the base layer, which is just SID, verifiable data storage over SIDs. That's like the slimmest like base layer we have, and then you can add on top of the services around that data storage, like what people want to do. Either it's like payment incentives, like a retrieve like compute, or like additional services to have like a stronger offer. We want that to be composable. But like, I'm gonna be very honest, it's like right now I'm very concerned about the way we're presenting this. We're just saying, oh, we're gonna make the same base layer now, and now everyone go build the component you think it makes the most sense. No, then to the user, it's gonna be very confusing. It's like, okay, do I now have to know all these services? I have to select the one to get the package I want. I'm gonna be very realistic. There will be a couple groups in the ecosystem, maybe starting with one, maybe starting with two, I don't know. But there gotta be groups that are working together to build individual services, but then there's gotta be a group that's like packaging the different like services and pack it as a product that offers to a user group. And I will argue that the team, the entity, the group, whatever you want to call it, that build the best product, they will win the market. They will win the most demand, and they will be able to get most demand to the service providers. And because they have the demand, they will attract more high quality service providers. And I think that does takes coordinated and designated like effort for it to do. We cannot imagine Filecoin magically next year that people just come in, building all the small component that can be offered to build different products, and suddenly a product just magically appear. Yep. There gotta be someone actually build a product over this.
I'm not arguing. So Nick, do you mind if I just continue a bit before and get back to you? I'm not arguing for chaos here because, and I'm certainly not arguing for putting complexity into the user's hands, because this is a lesson that we're learning and both pushing hard on, is that users and downstream developers don't want complexity. They want simplicity. And so the ideal version of this puts some of that complexity into the SDK or other SDKs, or maybe if Ian wants to develop his thing, then there's a particular vertical version of this that's just represented in software somewhere else that does his path. Maybe Storage does their own thing that has their own path. But ideally, the software that we present to developers has all this stuff. So when you use Synapse and you say with CDN true, it just adds that additional fielding thing on there. Yes, and so here, when I say the client wants this package, and it's not the actual user or even necessarily the developer. The SDK is doing this coordination of figuring out what this bundle is together. We really don't want to put all the complexity, as per that last session, putting the complexity into the developer's hands is great to give them options, but most of the time they don't want to know or care, so let's not do that. There's a couple more things. I just want to continue on this theme about client complexity. One of the biggest problems with this model that I don't have a good answer for is these arrows at the top. Each Filecoin Pay has to be permissioned by the client to allow contracts to manage payment rails. Now, if we are in this model, there's one contract that's setting up to 3 rails. So that's an easy permission model, there's just one. In this model, potentially a client has to deal with 3 or more contracts to permission. So The authorization is threefold. Potentially more, maybe a new service that shows up, so there's got to be more authorization. That seems like complexity, because already dealing with this authorization process is already complex. So I'm concerned about that part. Out of all of this, that's the bit that concerns me the most. Maybe we can fix that with a new version of Filecoin Pay. Maybe we can do it with batch processing. Maybe we can do it with Smart SDK.
Just want to flag that lunch is served in the quiet zone.
Okay. I think people are welcome to walk out if they want, but maybe we'll just finish up some of these questions. Nick? Yep.
So yeah, I wanted to, so there were discussions around the data structures and CIDs and multi-hashes around the SDK, how it handles, but I would like to open, because it's about the future of Fox smart contract layer, and would like to open about the smart contracts and the SPs layer, a discussion, which is, it should be really easy to have an abstract interface that is standard between all the services. So that way, going for what Jenny said, that there are different services offering, and probably one is going to win because it offers the best incentives for storage providers and for users. But either case, the SP should be using the same software, easy to opt in into any service. So having a unified interface in the contracts, this will allow the storage providers to opt in any service that it gives them better incentives without breaking Curio or whatever is going to exist.
Yeah, the ideal version of this is I don't really want to have to say to an on-ramp, go and fork our contract, make your own, and go and do another branch of Curio and have your own, or maybe implement your own, and have this splintering of the ecosystem where we're actually not working together and we're multiplying. And SPs have to make these hard choices, and we'll run multiple versions of software. We've got these contracts that we can't index nicely and provide nice dashboards for. Really would like a bit more unification here, where SP just has to run one bit of software and they can opt into whatever they want.
I think it's really important, and at the beginning it was Filecoin services and it was the cloud, and if you see like AWS or any cloud provider, like they have a bunch of services to pick up, so it should be unified so that the users have a lot of options, right?
I think that we have a lot to learn from what I'm observing in the ERC 8004 community. We have a lot to learn from there. The reason why I'm saying that is what they started with is a spec. A very high-level v0.1 draft spec, at least have those interfaces defined. Are they perfect? No, they are not perfect. However, it brings the community of the builders to basically build toolings. For example, they were building 8004 scanner or reputations all around the spec, which those tools are what the builders, the people need, that creates the ecosystem, creates the network effect. And then because all those tools exist, then you can also, and there will be leading tools, I'm not gonna lie, right? And then as you learn from the builders what those interfaces are, the community can iterate on the interfaces together according to one ERC. Rather than right now, we basically have 11 different opinions on what those interfaces are, and then we're just calling, we're keep having reference implementation as the spec, which is really bad. Now it's okay, if that reference implementation decided to take a different route, Curio decided to move away from their current market implementation and go to market v2. Now it's either you don't have a service at all, or you cannot add the new features to move into a better service. What I'm trying to say is right now it's one single team can basically change their software and say, I'm changing the standard of the Filecoin network, how builders interact, what the interfaces are. And I think that's wrong. It should be a coordinated conversation among the community to build that alignment on what kind of the interfaces set, or different interfaces, but limited options, at least people can choose from, so that we can build around that. So I think a lot to learn there. I think we need to get better at defining FRCs and writing those. Not gonna propose, I think people are hesitant to do that. It's oh, I'm just gonna create something that no one agrees, have a lot of opinions and never get implemented. Have those discussions, and we will iterate over that. Again, PCID v1, v2 takes a long time, but it's a good example here.
Kuba had a hand up. I'd like to hear his thoughts on the... Yeah, it was about the authorization thing of Filecoin Pay. I reckon you had something smart to say.
You could, if you make Orchestrator a bit more secure, you can proxy the affirmations through it.
Yeah.
So you only approve the Orchestrator, and then it proxies its decisions to the services.
I did wonder about that, but that seemed like a bit of a security headache. But maybe we can work on that.
It's doable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, that's very important because otherwise, from the Filecoin, the user developer perspective, they will have to authorize and allow like all these like individual services so that they can take the money, which is like a huge overhead. Ideally, it will be like, okay, this is the root service, and then I am just like buying this root services, and the root services will, handle the fund distributions.
I just don't want to turn this back into a permissioned model where to be a feature in here, you have to get permission from someone to be on the authorization list to do, like the whole point of doing it in Filecoin Pay was that the client gets to decide.
But that's somewhat expected, right? That hey, if I'm gonna be taking money and someone gonna start feeding me users, right? They need to. There has to be some vetting process from the like if I'm including you in a bundle, I vetted you somehow, right?
Yeah, but that ends up being mostly a server and client agreement thing. It's like, otherwise, who cares? Why should I care?
You could have, like you could bundle things and then have Orchestrator like also allow for additional things, right? You could have bundle plus, right?
Sure.
To reduce the number of...
Yeah, there could be a process whereby Orchestrator is approved, like will have a white list of sub-services that it will act on behalf of. And maybe any other service comes along here that wants to do payment rails as well, has to deal with the complexity itself. So maybe there's a layering approach. Yeah,
because,
we can explore that. Yeah.
On the FRC, like it's just pure for me. Like responding to you, Jennifer, it's pure one. Like there's the difficulty of design by committee. Like I don't know how 8004 process went. Like you could probably inspect that, but it probably lasted months if I were to guess. And yeah. And but like the other side of it is, it's the size of community. Like if we put out a FRC, like PDP FRC, no PDP explorers are getting built from nowhere, right?
We do have to wrap up soon, but some final comments.
No, we funded that work. We funded that.
Okay,
work.
So Vic's been. Yeah, but he's been struggling for a while there.
Yeah, just want to say. Honestly, like it's great to see that like we are going back to the basics and kind of rethinking things. Like I think that was super necessary, and I think it's also like super nice to start like super lean, like what I'm seeing here, and then go up.
Yeah.
Because there are like, and this is why I was asking questions like, do you know which tools I should use, both like Go, Rust, whatever I want to do if I want to interact with the content addressing, because like we are always kind of assuming that clients are going to do that, but like no one is actually going there and checking what those tools are and are they being maintained, who is maintaining them and so on, which is becoming more of an issue lately. So it's great to see. Like ultimately at some point we'll need to like figure out how we want to like merge all of this into one single language that everyone talks. Otherwise this is not one network, it's just a bunch of networks publishing stuff like in a form that does not talk the same language. So it's like, we want to figure out like it's like domain names in this particular case. How do we actually figure out like how we use the same domain names like in this network, on this layer? Yeah. But like that's definitely something that we can take like
the way I'm thinking about it is that we are in a new phase of, we're building for now developers. Like we're making our stuff actually usable. That's what we want to be doing now. Like if it's not usable, there's no point in us being here. That's what we have to do now. And so we're focused on making sure builders get what they want. We're trying to bring those builders in, give them the tools they want. And I'm hopeful that exercise actually makes us focus on what they are asking for. Nick, do you want to finish us up?
Like in a lot of ecosystems, like Uniswap has some stuff like called hooks that they need to whitelist. And I think this makes sense, right? Because you want to make sure that this fork ecosystem, at least maintained by Filecoin, is secure and is audited. But I wanted to just point again that there should be a WAGMI version for Curio that is only about listening to PDP, and all services are using this abstract contract, so they have exactly these interfaces. And then you can build on top of them. And Curio that has Filecoin Beam, IPNI, it could be a different branch, but there is one version of the software that listens to the WAGMI version, so people can build on top of this.
Yeah, that's fine, and that's one of the reasons I was saying that a storage provider should be able to say something like, I only do bytes, don't bother me with IPNI, and maybe in this system they even get to express that you can only bother me for retrievals once a month. Maybe that SP doesn't get any business, but maybe that makes sense for some clients. I don't know.
I agree with you, but I just want to be very careful of like how we say these things. It should be one version just for Curio, because you are not talking about one very specific SP software. That cannot be the only one. I still, again, go back to first principle, it should be standard interface. Like, I totally agree with you on that, because like, it cannot be an interface built on top of one particular software where they can make very opinionated decisions in some area. There are common spaces that needs to be standardized so that people like Ramo or Storcha, they have their own software, they have their own implementation. If they want to be a part of this, they gotta like implement those standards, right? So I just want to say when we say we are building one WAGMI for just Curio, we are excluding other parties that's participating in the network. And I just want to be very careful to not do that, because I'm hoping to bring Volk on board, and that's excluding him right now.
That we need to finish, so you guys need to get some lunch. So thanks everyone. Let's talk. If you want to talk more about this, come and get me, or we'll huddle. So thank you.